My time, yeah.
Thank you. Good evening. I forgot my mic was there. It's one of those things. Thank you, Lily, for introducing me, and Rick for recording, everyone who's making this concert possible, and you all for being here this evening. So yes, I'm Robert Buxton. Great to be back. I play classical piano and I speak about the music, and I do things maybe a little differently in the sense that, well, first of all, I like to start concerts with an improvisation. And the reason is because that's what they did. If you go back 200 years ago or so, or more, in classical music, improvisation was what they did all the time. And for some reason we stopped. In the 20th century, thereabouts, there was a philosophy of the music that came about that it should be more exact, almost like preserving a museum piece, which is good because there's that honor, it's honoring history, but there's the problem to me with that is it puts things a bit in a glass case. So anyway, to improvise, there are different things we can do. And what I was thinking tonight is just to ask you for some random notes. We'll create a theme and I'll just do something with that, if you want. Another route we can take is I can play some silly melody, like say Happy Birthday or something, in the style of a classical composer of your choice. Which one do you want? You want?
Both.
Okay, both. Well, okay, so I heard Tchaikovsky. You want Happy Birthday in the style of Tchaikovsky? Okay, or Beethoven. Okay, well, let's start with Tchaikovsky. No, yeah, no, it's okay. Let's do Tchaikovsky, because I heard that first. Yeah, okay. Happy Birthday. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. I think I already have an idea of what I'm going to do here. So.
Decide.
I'll explain what I did because, and that's why I had to think about it for a second, because what I thought I would do is actually weave the melody of Happy Birthday into a diluted version of the first piano concerto by Tchaikovsky. in the beginning. But I also didn't want to stick to that because I felt that that would be sort of two-dimensional. So I tried to then just go off into another, what's maybe some of it sounded like Tchaikovsky. But at any rate, that's all it is. Improvisation is just, see what happens. And improvisation is, to me, it's like a bridge between composition and performance. And maybe at the end, I'll play something I wrote. I don't know, it depends on the time and the mood, because I've been trying to do more of that too. I think even if I don't think I write good music, because I don't think I do, but I think it's important to engage in it. It's like a language. It's like, if classical music can tend to be something like ancient Greek or Latin if we don't speak it. It's just a written language, but it should be spoken. Languages are meant to be spoken. Okay, but at any rate, I'm still doing this theme that I've been doing here for a long time, which is arrangements, is that I'm obsessed with arrangements, because with an arrangement you can pretend to be not a pianist. And I'd love to be something else, especially a violinist. I love the violin. And I keep finding new repertoire that, arrangements of violin repertoire, or different versions of pieces that you'll hear on the violin primarily. And so that's just, I keep living out this dream of doing that. And the first piece I'm going to play is by Gluck, who was a Viennese opera composer mainly in the mid-18th century. And he was a big influence on Mozart. He was kind of a bit before Mozart, right? So Mozart, especially in his operas, was influenced by Gluck. And this piece is it's a famous melody from Gluck's Orpheus, or Orfeo, based on the Orpheus myth, Orpheus and Eurydice, in which Eurydice dies and goes to the underworld, and Orpheus goes after her with his harp. It's a lyre, L-Y-R-E, not L-I-A-R, that's a very different meaning. And he goes to the underworld and plays for the gods of the underworld. Finally, Hades relents and says, you can take her to earth with you under one condition, that you don't look back. And you may have heard that phrase in another story from the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah. There's that same line, don't look back. Unfortunately, at the last moment, Orpheus does turn and looks back, and Eurydice disappears forever, back to the underworld. So it's a very tragic myth. It's also a very musical myth with the music, Orpheus playing the harp. Actually, opera was born from that myth. The first operas were written with that as the story in the 16th century and early 17th century. So, but in Gluck's Orfeo, they changed the plot around. I can't tell you how shocked I was when I went to see it at the Met. And at the very end, because I didn't read about the opera, I wanted to be surprised. I just read about the Greek myth and everything. At the end, Eurydice shows up. After all of this, and they have a big party, and everyone lives happily ever after, and that's it. And I was thinking, why do they do that? I liked it. It ended on a nice note. But I think it's because 1760s, when this was written, this was the age of enlightenment. And I don't think a tragic ending like the original one would fit in the spirit of that time, of the people like Rousseau and Voltaire. There was more optimism, I think, in that time period. So, this melody is not sung in the opera. It's from an instrumental interlude called Dance of the Blessed Spirits, played by flute and strings. And there's also a dance, ballet-like thing that accompanies this music in the opera. There are many versions of this that are, separate from the opera, that are performed in recitals. There's especially a violin version. That's kind of how I got to this, listening to Jascha Heifetz play it, and Misha Elman, and all these great old violinists that I just love. And then there's this piano arrangement by 19th century composer Scambati. And I love the name, by the way. It's such a beautiful name, Scambati. It's just, I feel like it should be the name of a dish. I'll have the penne alla Scambati, please. Marinara sauce. I don't know. So, but Scambati, what he does with this is he makes it's sort of an old-fashioned type of arrangement. It's almost like he's improvising with it. He does these things, these rolled chords, like, instead of doing, he does, that's a very 19th century effect. And I love it. It's old-fashioned, and I love it for that reason. This arrangement is the sort of thing pianists would more typically play 120 years ago. And especially Sergei Rachmaninoff played this a lot. And there's a recording of his, which is just, it's so beautiful. So anyway, here is the Gluck Scambati, melody from Orpheus and Eurydice. Thank you. And this piece, I think, has a universality to it. I'll explain, what I mean. People will often tell me something along these lines. They'll say, I enjoy hearing classical music, bits and pieces of it, but I feel like I don't know enough about the history or the theory. I don't know enough to really get it as I should, and I feel bad about that. And let me tell you a story about what happened to me at the home of a Russian painter. My mother is from Russia, and this is one of her friends, who's a brilliant painter named Anatoly Chernyshov. And I was at his house looking at one of his abstract paintings. And there was this gentleman who was attending the party, another Russian painter whose name is Grisha. Big guy, almost like bear-like guy, And I was looking at this painting, and I thought the same thing. I thought it's beautiful, but I don't really know anything. I was 14 years old. I didn't know anything about painting. And this gentleman, Grisha, comes and he puts his arm around me. He says, "This is very beautiful." Oh. And I said, "Well, yes, it is." Silence. And then I said, "But can you help me understand it?" And he looked at me with these eyes, and he grabbed me and started shaking me. And I thought that said, "My time has come." You know, it was really scary. And he said, "No, no, you have to look, and you have to feel." And that stuck with me. In other words, trust yourself, and trust what you feel when you hear something or when you see something. That's not to say that studying history and theory is not important. It is, but that's secondary, I think, to the initial emotional reaction. Anyway, so moving on to the next piece. This is Auf Flügeln des Gesanges, or On Wings of Song, by Felix Mendelssohn. And you'll be grateful to know that I'm not going to actually sing this because it is a song. It's a reading with a text by Heinrich Heine. I can't sing, and I definitely can't sing in German. So Franz Liszt arranged it for solo piano, thankfully, to him, and that's what I'm going to play. You know, Mendelssohn was a child prodigy extraordinaire. I read he was composing things at an even younger age than Mozart. Not that it's a contest, but he was really young when he was writing stuff. And I want to also clear something up about child prodigies. Some of the great composers were, some weren't. A true child prodigy is not just technique. You can go on YouTube, there's kids who can play fast and loud, that's great. But a real child prodigy will make you cry, they'll make you feel something. Like Yehudi Menuhin, the violinist. When he was 8 years old, you could hear him play the violin. He had this maturity beyond his 8 years. And he would make it's as if he had all this life experience in his playing. That's a true prodigy, and that's what Mendelssohn was. And Mendelssohn, by all accounts, he only lived to be 38, which is just, healthcare was not so great in those days, unfortunately. I think it's a little better now, mostly. But at any rate, you can feel his personality in this. I feel like he's talking to us through the music, if that makes any sense. He was not a show-off. He was not stuck up. He could have been. Many composers were. Wagner was, for example. That's a whole other story. But, Mendelssohn, there's a story about his humility, which is that in those days, before Liszt's prominence, he's already arranging this piece here, but before Liszt's prominence as a concert pianist, in piano performances, pianists would always put sheet music in front of them. And Mendelssohn memorized everything, but he didn't want people to think he was putting on airs, so he'd actually take sheet music for some entirely different piece and just put it there. That's what he was like. And, finally I'll say that Mendelssohn and the poet Heinrich Heine, who wrote the text for this, Mendelssohn was born into a prominent Jewish family in Hamburg. And actually his grandfather, Moses Mendelssohn, if I'm not mistaken, I've read somewhere that he was one of, or if not the founder of the Reform Judaism movement, which is still a big denomination in Judaism today. But Mendelssohn, Felix Mendelssohn, he ended up leaving the faith. He ended up converting due to the horrible anti-Semitism of this time and place. And if, I mentioned the name Wagner, Wagner changed music and theater and everything, I'm not denying it, but Wagner, the depth of Wagner's vileness, particularly his anti-Semitism, is so great. Actually, with Mendelssohn, Wagner admired his music, but he had this habit of actually wearing gloves when he would conduct Mendelssohn's music. It's really vile. It's this anti-Semitic thing. Wagner put some kind of blemish on Mendelssohn's name, and he said Mendelssohn's music is good, but it's superficial. This is nonsense. I just want to, because in some circles you'll hear that. I've heard that phrase before. People say, well, Mendelssohn, he's not really, that's all Wagner's doing. So at any rate, so much to think about. But here is Mendelssohn's On Wings of Song, arranged by Liszt for solo piano. So here it is. I'm sorry, I talk too much, don't I? Thank you. Now, by the way, the text of that song, if I were to sing it, is not unlike a pop song you might hear on the radio. It's a love song. And it's the words are something like this. I will take you away on wings of song all over the world, across the Ganges River. There's a line there that, which I like. It's just, it's interesting. So, but at any rate, now we're going to move on to Paganini. I've played you many Paganini-inspired pieces in our last meetings. This is Paganini arranged by Robert Schumann. And last time I was here, I played several of these. But so Robert Schumann did 12 arrangements of Paganini caprices. The caprices are these solo violin pieces from the word capricious, caprice, sort of off the cuff. Some of them are sort of even like technical exercises for the fingers too. So the last time I was here, I played you, over the summer, I was playing from the first set. Schumann wrote an opus 3 of 6 of them, and then an opus 10, from which I'm going to play tonight. And I didn't know this at the time, when we met last time, that the opus 3, Schumann did not even intend for public performance. He viewed them as pedagogical pieces. He wrote out the violin part and simply added some chords and accompaniment. I think they're wonderful pieces, but I didn't know that Schumann believed that, so oops, I'm sorry, I played it for you. He didn't intend it to be played in public, but I think maybe he shouldn't have believed that. So anyway, in that first set, Schumann is trying to be, I don't want to say like Google Translate, but he's trying to stick to the original as much as possible, the original violin pieces, and not change it a whole lot. This is because Schumann, like many of the Romantics, he heard Paganini play the violin in the 1830s. And he not only heard it, he was just floored by Paganini. Paganini was a force of nature. He was like, I think of him as like the Jimi Hendrix of that time. And it sounds far-fetched, but really you read about his life, it's not that different. The people who hated Paganini claimed that he was possessed. And then the ones who loved him, like Schumann and Liszt and the whole Romantic generation, they just adored him. And Paganini comes about in a time, not only in music history, but in human history. It was like, a very volatile period. The end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century. First you had the American Revolution, then the French Revolution, then the Napoleon, the monarchies were falling. And in all of this, you have really two major, there's a lot of great composers from this time, but the two really who stand out are Paganini and Beethoven. And they reflect this turbulent time period. And they were the composers, I think, really the Romantics, especially in the beginning, they just, adored. So, anyway, Schumann did this first set, which I played, some of last time. And then he waited a while, he wrote some other things, and he came back to the project of arranging Paganini for the piano, did the Opus 10 studies, and I'm going to play the fourth one. And in the second set, from which I'm going to do tonight, Schumann takes a lot more liberty with the original Paganini. In other words, he makes it really his own. I don't hear much Paganini in here. When I play this, it feels even physically and sounds like something Robert Schumann just wrote. So Schumann, he was born in 1810, only 1 year after Mendelssohn. They were friends, by the way. He was born in Zwickau, which is what was East Germany, near Leipzig, kind of, which is where Mendelssohn ended up living and conducting the Leipzig Gewandhaus. And they were all, in the same circle. Anyway, Schumann, his life looked very different from Mendelssohn. He was not a child prodigy at all. Originally, he wanted to be a novelist. And he kept writing wonderfully throughout his life, but the novelist thing didn't quite pan out. Then he wanted to be a virtuoso pianist, and I think that's when he wrote some of these pieces. Unfortunately, he damaged his hands at the time, maybe from playing these, but especially from investing in a weird device, contraption meant to strengthen the pinky finger. And he damaged the muscles in his hands. This was the era of the virtuoso pianists, and everyone was in a race to become, faster and louder than the next person. There's a story, there's a newspaper article about the pianist Alfred Dreischock, who was a big virtuoso at that time. They said that he played so loud that if the wind was right, you could hear him in Vienna from Paris. So that was what was going on. But that also, Schumann, he damaged his muscles. He couldn't continue with that path. And so then only after all of that sort of failure, he ended up devoting himself completely to composition. And to that, he had bipolar disorder. And they did not really understand it the way we do now. We understand it more, and we have treatment for it. Not in his time. And so his life was incredibly difficult. And this is, I think, in some sense, reflects in his music. You know, his music can be not easy listening always, especially because of the way he develops things. He doesn't stick with an idea and go with it. He'll have one thing and then splice, boom, another thing, boom, splice, another thing. It's just one section after another. And one person I heard criticized Schumann. He said, Schumann is like shish kebab. You have a piece of onion, a piece of meat. There's no unity to it. But so what? I love shish kebab, you know, and I love Schumann. So why does it have to be, you know? But that's just what it is. And also, it's not just that he had bipolar, I think, that influenced that. I think even more importantly is the literature he loved. E.T.A. Hoffmann, Jean-Paul Richter, these were writers at the time who, like, The Nutcracker is by E.T.A. Hoffmann. This is like fantasy-like literature, and it's never linear development. They're novellas, and they have these strange plot twists and splicing of plots, and just like Schumann's music. So he was, you know, going for that effect, I think. Finally, I want to say, I've heard some people say about Schumann, they say, well, you know, he was crazy, so his music was crazy. And I really don't agree with that, because having a condition is not being crazy. I mentioned the name Wagner. By the way, I admire Wagner's music. I'm just, you know, no one would argue about his character. Wagner was crazy, okay? He was crazy. But Schumann was he was a good person, you know. He was a wonderful husband to Clara, you know, his wife, a great musician herself. He was a wonderful father by all accounts. He even wrote all this music for his kids. They had 7 children together. So, you know, a condition like bipolar doesn't change a person's character. That's what I'm saying. And Schumann was a good person. So anyway, this is the C minor Paganini Caprice arranged by Robert Schumann. And you're going to hear rapid mood changes. Schumann even created these literary characters to go along, or to, you know, for the two sides of his personality. His manic side he called Florestan, and you're going to hear Florestan here. Eusebius, that's what he called his depressive side. And you're going to hear that too, especially in the very beginning. He starts with Eusebius, it's very, you know, it's like an elegy almost, and then out of the blue, a march. Why? Well, that's Schumann, that's what he does. So here is the piece, and you're going to think it's over probably 3 or 4 times, but it ain't. It keeps, you know, going, and that's part of his style. So. Thank you. Tonight's program is heavy, I have to say. It's on the heavy side. But sometimes, well, we're having some heavy weather coming, so it's good to prepare for that. Next, I'm going to play a slightly longer piece. This is Johannes Brahms. I'm not sure if I played part 1 for you last time. I don't think so. But I'm playing part 2, so I definitely didn't play that here. This is book 2 of Brahms's Paganini Variations. So, Brahms, actually, as a young man in the 1850s, he showed up at the Schumann's home, at their door in Dusseldorf. Knocked on their door, he said, actually Clara answered the door, Robert's wife. She was a great composer and pianist herself. And he said, "Hi, I'm Johannes Brahms. I have some music with me. I would like some advice." Now, times were different back then, so they invited him in. He played some of his music for them, and the Schumanns, they said, "Why don't you just live with us?" Can you imagine that today? Some kid off the street comes, "Hey, I need somebody." "Yeah, just live with us. You're brilliant. Just stay here. We'll adopt you. Why not?" And unfortunately, not long after this time, Robert Schumann's mental health and physical health really deteriorated. He jumped into the icy Rhine River and was rescued by some fishermen. He ended up going to an asylum, which in those days was not, they didn't allow visitors. It was like isolation. It was almost like going to a prison. It's horrible. No visitors allowed. Actually, Clara snuck in at the very end, and I think Robert even was nonverbal at some point. And he died before he reached 50. He was like 47 or something. And actually, Clara was pregnant with their 7th child at this time, and Brahms was assisting the family with all this. And there was some controversy, like neighbors said, "What is this young guy doing here?" And so that leads to another issue which you may have heard about, that there's this kind of myth, and from historians I've read, it's probably not, there's no probably evidence of it, that there was a love triangle going on, and that Brahms and Clara had some sort of relationship. They did go on vacation to Switzerland with the children, and the two of them shortly after Robert's death, which was really more just to get some fresh air, to mourn a little bit. But there was this myth that came up, and it still very much persists. There was a movie in the 40s with Katharine Hepburn playing the role of Clara Schumann. As much as I adore Katharine Hepburn and The African Queen, for example, my gosh. This story, it's not true. It's good Hollywood, but it's not good history. Just like Amadeus, that movie, it's not real history. So, but at any rate, what was true was there was some unrequited feelings between Brahms and Clara. That is for sure. You can read their letters, and they actually, both of them, burned or destroyed many of those letters. So we don't know but the way I see it is it was kind of a very 19th century, almost a Victorian era romantic thing that was restrained. It's, I don't know, the meaning or their feelings, they never quite expressed them. And I think that this is a theme in Brahms's life and in his music. He was a loner his whole life. He ended up settling in Vienna. He actually was influenced a lot by Slavic music. Vienna is Austro-Hungary. There's a big Slavic influence there. Why did he write? That's pretty fun music for such a serious composer. Brahms was very serious. But so I think that those unrequited feelings, and I don't mean to play, like I'm trying to be People magazine or whatever, but I think that you can hear that kind of unrequited or longing or something in a lot of Brahms' music, including this. There's some in the quiet parts, you hear that, I think. I didn't know him, so don't quote me. The Paganini variations, they're based on the 24th Caprice by Paganini. Famous theme, right? He originally wrote these simply as exercises for the fingers. Difficult. Sent me to the orthopedist over the summer when I was learning. And the doctor said, what's causing you pain? I said, Brahms is causing me pain. Goodness. So, but what happened is Brahms wrote these exercises. He realized that they had musical value, so he just decided, okay, they're just going to be concert pieces. But they're sort of a double feature. They're a set of variations, but they're also a set of exercises. So, tricky stuff to play. Here's book 2. Variations on Paganini variations. I promise. very much. I wanted to play one more piece. It's not quite as long, if that's okay. If you need to leave, I understand. I hope I don't overstay my welcome. I do talk too much. That's okay. So I want to play another set of variations. It's shorter than this, by Ludosławski, Polish 20th century composer. And this is a piece. Ludosławski was born in 1915, and he wrote this in 1941. It's quite dissonant. It's kind of on the avant-garde, abstract side. And so, you're going to hear things like this. You're just going to hear those things. And I'm giving you a disclaimer. You may not like the piece, and you may not like me after I play it, but the funny thing is I've been playing this a lot in places and for people, and I noticed people warm up to it. And I think there's a reason. So a lot of this style of music, and this style of painting, to abstract painting or theater of the absurd, this is all 20th century stuff. And there's a reason that the arts in the 20th century can be so acerbic and disturbing even. Because the 20th century was disturbing, and it was horrific, a lot of it. And I hate to say it, I don't know if our century is going a lot better so far, but Ludosławski was in the Polish army. And at the beginning of the Second World War, they were surrounded, of course, on one side by the Nazis, another side by the Soviets. His brother was captured and killed, I think, by the Nazis. The Polish army sort of disintegrated, and he walked back to Warsaw. Now, I will say this, had he been in the Warsaw Ghetto, had he been Jewish, it would have been even more difficult to survive. If you've seen that movie, The Pianist, about the Polish Jewish pianist, Władysław Szpilman, that tells that story. But so Ludosławski was living outside, not in the Warsaw Ghetto, but he was in Warsaw at this time, trying to make ends meet. And he would give concerts in bars, mostly 2 piano concerts with his fellow avant-garde Polish composer, Andrzej Panównik. And a lot of the concerts they did, especially in the daytime, they played popular music, jazz arrangements and things. But at night is when they would give these concerts of their compositions. That's what they lived for. And those concerts were illegal. Now, whatever you feel about avant-garde music, and by the way, I don't always want to listen to it. You have to be sort of in the right mood, and I'm sort of trying to give you a little disclaimer here. But I'll tell you one thing. No totalitarian regime accepts that kind of music. Not the Nazis, and then later in Poland, the Soviets, no way. That's why Shostakovich was always in fear of his life. He would write something, and the authorities would like it, then he'd write something else. It was a little too dissonant. Stalin would get upset. He'd have to formally apologize, write letters, and sometimes Shostakovich, sorry for the tangent, Shostakovich would sleep in the hallway of his apartment complex because he was expecting sometimes to be taken away by the KGB. He didn't want his family to wake up from it. But anyway, this is the kind of circumstances Ludosławski was living in. There's one story that they were giving a 2-piano concert late at night in a bar, and the SS walked in. This is back to Warsaw. So the SS walked in, and they put pistols to their heads, the pianists, and they said, "This concert is illegal, and we will shoot you right here on the spot." Well, the bartender came out and said, "These gentlemen work for me. Please leave them alone." They did not work for him. Okay? That's what life was like. And if this piece feels excruciating at times, well, that's because it was. That's what it was. It's a realist thing. Warsaw fell, and everyone had to get out. And when Ludosławski, on his way out, he only managed to bring one thing with him. This piece, the sheet music. Everything else he had written up to that point, lost. Everything he owned before that, lost. But he brought this piece with him. And the original piece is for 2 pianos. In 1978, he arranged it for piano and orchestra. And by the way, it's based on that same, but what he does with it is very different from Brahms. I had the crazy idea of arranging it for 1 piano. And when I was 3/4 of the way through doing that, I thought, this is impossible. But it was too late to go back. It's like if you're swimming to an island and you're 3/4 of the way there, you say, I better go back. Well, you've got to go the full way. So it's a little fresh for me. But I wanted to play it because I think it's important, and I think it's great music. And we'll close at least the classical part, then I usually end with like a short gospel song or so. I like to play gospel. I'll tell you why later. But anyway, here it is, Ludosławski Paganini variations.
clean off before this piece.
Thanks. Now I'm going to close with some old-time gospel. I like to play gospel. You know, I have two immigrant parents. My mother's from the Soviet Union, and my dad's an immigrant from Southern Virginia. So he raised me on gospel. So we'll close. I'm sorry about the time. I just didn't even know how long that would go. So this is Leaning on the Everlasting Arms, and thank you all for coming and for having me.